the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Monday, March 11th, 2013, getting into the middle of the month, coming up here on spring. You wouldn't know it to look at some parts of the Northern Hemisphere right now. Got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in the control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now today, March 11th, a day that will live in infamy. It's a couple of anniversaries here. First of all, it's the 2-year anniversary of the great Japanese quake and tsunami that led to the disaster at Fukushima, and we're getting all kinds of souvenirs of that washing up on the beaches here in Hawaii. It's a big problem. They say we're going to be dealing with this for at least 10 years here and along the U.S. West Coast. This weekend I got to go down and find some little piece of flotsam from Fukushima to add to the world-famous What Really Happened debris collection. Which started as a joke, but it's actually starting to turn into something rather arcanely interesting. Maybe I can get a reality show out of it, like these other very bizarre things that people are doing here. But that anniversary, today is also the 19th birthday of my political website. It was on this day, back in 1994, that I saw that photograph of Vince Foster's hand near the gun he supposedly committed suicide with. And being that I worked in visual effects in the motion pictures, the photos screamed fake at me. I opened my Yap, my career disappeared, and all of a sudden I had a new one as a peace activist, a blogger, and eventually a talk show radio host. So we are now officially in our 20th year, but as of today, the blog is 19 years old. It's been through a couple of incarnations. It began as a sub-page on my business development animation and visual effects page. Then it broke off separate under the name of Rancho Runamucka, and as it really began to take off, we rebranded as What Really Happened. And here we are today. The rest, as they say, is hysteria. Alrighty. Let's see, Saturday, this coming Saturday, going to mention it now because we don't have a show on that day, will be the anniversary of Rachel Corrie's murder at the hands, or should I say treads, of an Israeli bulldozer demolishing a Palestinian home, so that's coming up here. Big news appears to be that North Korea and South Korea are definitely ratcheting up the sabers, or ratcheting up the war rhetoric and rattling their sabers and sneering at each other across the demilitarized zone. North Korea has officially ended the ceasefire in the Korean War. They've severed all the lines of communication with the South, including the government-to-government hotline. The U.S. and South Korea are beginning their major military exercise off the shores of North Korea. Meanwhile, just to show the unintended consequences, South Korea is now saying, we have to have nuclear weapons. Because the North Korea has nuclear weapons, and we've got to have nuclear weapons. And so if the U.S. thought that going after North Korea was going to cool down nuclear proliferation, it's actually produced exactly the opposite result. Too many people think war is their solution to their economic and political problems, and everybody's just waiting for that first dumb move. And we've got the Japanese and the U.S. and the South Koreans exercising in the area, and we've got the Russians and the Chinese and the North Koreans exercising in the same area. It's just going to take one dumb mistake to really light things up over there. So it's kind of nervous, and I know people are sort of, their nerves are stretched to the breaking point because we see this very obvious attempt to corral us all into World War III. We all know it's a bad idea. We all know it's being done just to make the bankers a little bit richer. We all think it's stupid, and nobody in the government seems willing to listen to us. And maybe that's why in our next nation we need to have a law that any politicians who want to go to war against a country have to put their own children on the front lines of the invading force. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're getting a story that just came in from Investment Watch blog that the South Korean and U.S. drill that North Korea has been threatening war over has actually started. They're sailing off the coast of North Korea. They're firing their guns and their missiles and sneering at the North Koreans, and the North Koreans are not liking it. And again, this is all a U.S. provocation. Ever since China started talking about the gold-backed yuan as a replacement for the dollar, as the global trade and reserve currency, we have seen this constant maneuvering to try and somehow create a crisis with China that would politically and economically isolate them in order to protect that fiat paper dollar as the global reserve and trade currency. And a lot of countries do not want to go along with that. And it makes sense. We have in times in history, several times, seen these paper currencies collapse. Inevitably they do. There has never been a paper currency that sustained its usability and value over a significant amount of time. Because the overprinting as a solution to everybody's problems is simply too easy. But this is the first time in history where we've had a fiat currency that the global economies are tied to on the verge of collapse. And that's what makes this really dangerous. And all of these nations saying, let's disconnect now before we all get dragged down, they're right. And, you know, the pattern is very, very clear. Everybody who starts talking about gold-backed currencies and state-controlled banks, they get attacked. The U.S. is militarily forcing on the rest of the world the continuing use of the U.S. Federal Reserve note for global trade and reserve status, even as that currency is hovering on the edge of collapse. The very best outcome from the point of view of the Wall Street money junkies is they'll force the entire world back onto the dollar just as the dollar implodes and takes the whole world down with it. That's how insane this policy is. But ever since China started talking about the gold-backed yuan as a replacement for the dollar, we have seen China bashing, ooh, China's bad this, China's bad that. How are we going to get to war with China? Well, we're going to get to war with China through Korea, the same way that Roosevelt got us into war against Germany through Japan. And we're seeing this provocation of these exercises in North Korea's territorial waters. It's exactly the same thing Roosevelt was doing to provoke the Japanese. And behind that, of course, is the biggest provocation of all. The U.S. government goes around screaming, we can have nuclear weapons and our friends can have nuclear weapons, but you cannot. Then they start invading the nations that don't have nuclear weapons, like Iraq. And it puts these other nations in a bind. Do we not have nuclear weapons and leave ourselves open to an inevitable U.S. invasion, or do we get nuclear weapons as a deterrent, which can also trigger a U.S. invasion? So you're darned if you do and darned if you don't, from the point of view of North Korea and any other nation. Whether they get nuclear weapons or not, a U.S. attack is coming. If they have any kind of resources in their country that are worth anything at all in the world, you're going to be attacked and invaded by the United States. So we'll see what happens over there. Obviously, living out here in Hawaii, being, except for Alaska, the closest point to the area of potential conflict, everybody around here is a little bit nervous. Because North Korea does have rockets that, in theory, can reach at least this far. Can't reach the mainland, but they can reach this far. Are they setting us up for Pearl Harbor too? Those dastardly North Koreans! There'll be a new day of infamy. Hey, it worked back in the 1940s. We'll try the same line of bovine excrement with the American people. They'll fall for it. They're such loyal little believers. Meanwhile, over in Afghanistan, there's this engineering student at Kandahar University, Abdul Qayyum. And apparently over the weekend, he was detained by a CIA strike force that attacked the university. Grabbed some people and were just torturing them, probably just for the fun of it, because we all know you can't get useful intelligence torturing people. And President Hamid Karzai stepped in and said, all right, CIA, go home. Let these students go. They're just students. And so Karzai had to intervene and basically kick out the CIA. Why are the CIA just grabbing university students and torturing them? Well, it may be because, according to Hamid Karzai, who seems to be taking his job as president of Afghanistan a little more seriously than a lot of people expected him to, Karzai has now accused the United States of working with the Taliban to create a situation of violence in Afghanistan that will justify Obama keeping the American troops in Afghanistan after the promised 2014 troop withdrawal. Not that anybody believed Obama anyway when he was running for president in 2008. He said the first thing he would do as president is end the wars and bring our troops home. Obviously, that has not happened. And I don't think anybody's really taking 2014 seriously either. But Karzai is saying the U.S. is working with the Taliban to create a situation which will allow the U.S. to say, well, gee, we really wanted to keep our kids home, but we're going to have to leave them in 2014 until it runs out of oil and opium and anything else of any value. Over the weekend, we saw these stories surfacing about how the U.S. and Great Britain and other NATO allies are literally paying bribes to the Taliban to let convoy trucks through. It doesn't sound like they've really conquered that country at all. They're having to pay tribute to the regional warlords. And again, remember, in history, the last military commander to completely conquer and hang on to Afghanistan was Alexander the Great, and he only kept it for 3 years. It's not called the graveyard of empires for nothing. Now, apparently, the covert support for the so-called Syrian rebels is getting less and less covert. Apparently, a weapons airlift the whistle was blown on a weapons airlift from Croatia to the hired mercenaries in Syria, backed by the U.S. and Britain. So I guess they're starting to realize this idea that they're supporting a popular uprising, nobody's buying it any longer, and they're just going to go ahead and just more overt support. But that's what it is. It's another invasion and overthrow of a country for daring to want to run their own economy for their own benefit and to choose their own path into the future. How dare they? Don't they understand what the whole project for the New America Century was about? It's looking to me like the project for the New American Century is not going to make it to 20 years. Just like Hitler's 1,000-year Reich only made it for 12. Now we're seeing this article out of the Moscow Times. Hundreds of Russian Islamists fighting Assad in Syria, expert says. Ryus Suleimanov, head of the Kazan-based Volga Center for Regional and Ethno-Religious Studies, said he got this number from Russian militants who he said have no interest in exaggerating it, which means they are exaggerating it. And the reason for doing that is we know that Moscow is officially supporting Assad. And so this claim that there are Russian Islamists fighting against Assad is an attempt to basically muddy up the political support issue. So the U.S. can say, well, Russia's government may be supporting Assad, but the people of Russia are supporting the rebels. So to me, it looks like it's probably more propaganda. And I'm not saying there aren't a few Russian Islamists fighting in there with the hired mercenaries. Money is money and times are tight. We know that there are Irish in there and American in there. But this idea that there is a significant support for the Syrian rebels among the Russian people, I don't think so. No more than their support for the hired mercenaries in Syria among the American people. Now, a lot of people are very concerned over Brennan's confirmation as head of the CIA, partly because of his past record in supporting drone strikes, torture, various other programs of grabbing people and sending them to third-party countries. And analysts are thinking, he's going to make things worse. This is like hiring an arsonist to deal with a 5-alarm fire. Brennan's job is not going to be calm things down and bring the world back to peace. He's been chosen and confirmed to escalate things. And in particular, the drone attacks continue to be an area of tremendous controversy. Because setting aside the number of innocents who are killed with every one of these drone strikes is the question of, was the intended target actually guilty of anything? And the answer keeps coming back, no. They were being killed just in case they might do something the U.S. didn't like. Now, what happens when that benchmark is applied to drone strikes inside the United States of America, because the Department of Justice did not outright disclaim murder of Americans by drone. They hemmed and hawed, and they said extraordinary circumstances, and it would take certain rule, blah, 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 blah. But in the end, they left a loophole in their non-denial denial big enough to fly a drone through. And if they're using drones against people who might do something wrong, just like they're trying to bomb Iran because it might build nuclear weapons, sooner or later, they will apply that benchmark inside the United States of America. And people who have committed no crime at all are going to vanish in a flash of light, along with 20 to 30 people standing around them. This is the new reality in America. Back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're finishing up on the situation about the drones. There was that grandstanding filibuster by Rand Paul, and we're already starting to hear murmurings from him that he may actually consider a run at the White House in 2016. So he needs to build his reputation, and this certainly did. But it did call attention to this issue about drone strikes on American soil. And it finally ended with Eric Holder last week coming out with a letter which appeared on the surface to say, nah, it's not really going to happen. We need the authority, but we'll never, ever, 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 ever use it. But again, there was a loophole in what Holder was saying, big enough to fly a drone through. And it really raised more questions than it answered. The government's getting very evasive, very vague in its responses to American concerns. I think the whole point of Holder's initial comment to Rand Paul was to just get American people used to the idea that there were going to be drones overhead killing those gosh darn nasty terrorist suspects. And I don't think they were expecting the backflash they got. In fact, I'll be very honest, and you might want to keep an eye out for this as well. I'm seeing a lot of backpedaling these days. They'll come out with this new thing, and the American people will stand up and say, you're out of your mind! And they'll back off and say, well, no, what we really meant was this. And right now, the feeling I get from the federal government is more of bluff and bluster and a lot less assertiveness. In fact, they're almost starting to look like behind all those bullets and armored vans and everything, they're getting quite timid. They're afraid of provoking a violent reaction. I'm afraid of provoking a violent reaction, but definitely the federal government is. And I think all the bullets and armored cars and everything is an attempt to bluff Americans into not getting angry the way we're seeing all over Europe right now. Because like I said, the government may be buying all these hollow point bullets and all these personal defense weapons and everything for like the National Weather Service, but do you really think the people in those offices are going to risk their own lives to man the barricades to protect their bosses from an enraged American mob? I just don't see it as happening. I just don't see it as happening. I see it all as a gigantic bluff. The reading of the email, the TV cameras, all of that stuff. It's a bluff to scare you into silent consent. So just ignore it all. Just ignore it all. Stay on focus. Preservation of the Bill of Rights, especially that Second Amendment. Preservation of your own personal wealth in a climate of corporate and political predation against the American people. Because every time we hear one of these money junkies open their mouth, their only solution to the financial problem is we got to take more away from the people. They don't need all that money. They can go rooting through the garbage cans for food. Remember a couple of weeks ago we saw that in the corporate media. How you could balance your food budget by going through the trash bin and looking for uneaten food. They were trying to make it fashionable and socially acceptable. You don't know what the people who threw that into the trash had in terms of a contagious disease. It makes about as much sense as some of Senator Biden's, or rather Vice President Biden's comments on how to protect your home with a gun. You don't need an AR. Use a shotgun. Shoot it through the door. Somebody actually followed his advice, got arrested. Now, the bashing of Hugo Chavez continues to go on. And apparently, Associated Press came out with a story about just how completely Hugo Chavez had gone bonkers, wasting his money on health care for the Venezuelans when he really should have been building skyscrapers to attract business to Venezuela. Like, what kind of priorities did Mr. Chavez have? And obviously he had the priorities that made him immensely popular with the Venezuelan voters. The purpose of the government is to take care of the nation and its people, to do for the community that which the community needs and cannot do on their own. Chavez resisted the money junkies and their banking systems and their predations, and that's why they hated him. Wouldn't sell Venezuela's resources as cheaply as the oil companies wanted. Wouldn't sell the agricultural produce as cheaply as the food importers wanted. That's why they hated him. Same reason they hated Castro. Same reason they hated Mohammad Mossadegh. All of these leaders stood up and said exactly the same thing. We are willing to sell you our agricultural products and our natural resources and our manufactured goods, but you have to pay a fair market value. And American corporations don't like that. They love leaders who will strip mine the wealth of their nations and transfer it to American corporations in exchange for the suitable bribe to the leader. And they don't care what happens to the people of the country, whether it was the people of Iran until they kicked the Shah out in 1979, or the people of Cuba until they kicked out Batista, or down in the Philippines until they kicked out Marcos, or down in Chile, and on and on and on. It's a repeating pattern from U.S. foreign policy. Go into a country, overthrow the elected government, put in a puppet ruler who will let U.S. corporations strip mine the wealth of the nation for pennies on the dollar. And then the people get angry, kick out the puppet rulers. Oh, they're terrorists. They hate us for our freedoms. Yada, 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 yada. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, speaking of Venezuela, they have scheduled their new presidential elections for April 14th. And acting President Maduro only holds office until then, and they're going to have new elections. I would almost anticipate that we're going to see a flurry of foreign money pouring into Venezuela to try and skew the elections in favor of a pro-American, pro-banker party, the way we saw in Greece's second election. And apparently Kenyatta, despite interference by the British government, narrowly won his election and is still screaming about outside interference. Now, turning to the economy, we're getting this article from BusinessInsider.com about how more and more U.S. companies are keeping more and more of their money outside the United States, choosing overseas tax havens. In other words, all of this bailout money taken from you to give to these Wall Street corporations to loan back to you at interest, it didn't fail. They took that money, they put a lot of it in their own pockets as bonuses, and apparently they're parking the rest of it outside the United States, which means it's not available to loan back to the American people and American businesses at interest. It's simply looting the nation. And remember what we said around here, we got a saying on one of our coffee cups, the last official act of any government is to loot the nation. And it appears it's going on right now. All this money that was taken from you, all this debt that was placed on you on the promise that it was going to repair the economy, it hasn't happened. They moved the money in the wrong direction. Instead of taking trillions from the American people to give to Wall Street, if they'd reversed that, if they'd taken all the ill-gotten gains that Wall Street has from all of these frauds like LIBOR, mortgage-backed security fraud, if they'd taken all of that and divided it up among the American people, everybody would have gotten a check for about maybe $200,000. And if every American had been given a check for $200,000, nobody would have missed a mortgage payment. There wouldn't be a mortgage crisis. There wouldn't be a real estate crisis. People would have bought brand new American cars. Wouldn't have been a need for an automotive bailout. People would have taken some of that money, gone down to their local shopping mall, bought a brand new Cree LED light bulb, talk about those a little later in the show, or a new flat panel TV, or a new vacuum cleaner. There wouldn't be a retail crisis. Every single policy decision by the U.S. federal government relative to the economic meltdown was 180 degrees out of phase with what would work. It was all wrong. It was designed to accelerate the transfer of wealth from you, the American people, to the money junkies. Even the IMF is admitting what Iceland did was right. Throw the crooked bankers in prison, set the example so that new bankers won't just say, hey, I can get away with it too. Fire the government that helped the bankers loot the people. Write off all this made-up, fictional, fairy tale debt that we're all supposed to be enslaved to for the rest of our lives, and reset the system. And Iceland's economy is doing really well, which is why you never hear about them any longer. Now, adding insult to injury, over at Veterans News Now, there's an article asking, is Congress actually thinking of funding Israel's Iron Dome missile system before the domestic Head Start program? Because they're talking about all these across-the-board sequestration cuts, but at the AIPAC conference, Israel was in there saying, don't touch the money you give to us. It's like that line out of Fiddler on the Roof, so if you had a bad week, why should I suffer? And that's what they're saying. If your economy is in trouble, why should we, dependent on you, have to take any less? That's their attitude. And so we're in a situation right now where the U.S. Congress is cutting domestic programs of known social value for our children in order to preserve money for the Pentagon war machine and to continue funding Israel's war machine. I mean, if Israel wanted an Iron Dome, the smart thing would have been for the U.S. to develop it and then sell it to Israel, not just give Israel the money to develop it and then Israel gets to sell it around the world. Then they'll come back to the U.S. and say, look, everybody's got an Iron Dome now. We need more money to develop a super get-through-the Iron Dome missile. And the Congress will give it to them. But we're in a situation right now where the U.S. Congress considers Israel's war needs more important than programs for your children. That's not a government that's working for we the people. It's not even a government that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's of the money junkies, by the money junkies, and for the money junkies. Now, up in Philadelphia, there were these 12 protesters arrested in November 2011 for occupying a Center City Wells Fargo bank branch. Now, these 12 protesters claimed they were staging a citizen's foreclosure on the bank for engaging in discriminatory lending and sapping millions of dollars from the school district of Philadelphia through all these frauds, the mortgage-backed securities. After viewing video of the protests and hearing the defendants, a jury found all 12 defendants not guilty on charges of conspiracy and trespassing. This is a perfect example of what is called jury nullification, which is something that the courts don't want you to know about. And anybody talking about jury nullification around the courthouses can be arrested. But the reason we have juries is so that the jury can decide if in a given case the law is inappropriately being misapplied or there were extenuating circumstances. That's what jury nullification means. You, if you're sitting on a jury judging a crime, if you think the person was justified doing what they do, they're trying to make a good point, the law is being misapplied, you do not have to follow the letter of the law. The judge does, the prosecutors do, the defendants do. You, as the jury, are actually above the law in a court of law. You don't have to convict if you think the person was making an important point or had justification. And that just happened up there in Philadelphia. And it's an important thing Americans need to remember. That's the whole reason for the jury. If you're just there to rubber stamp the judge's opinion, there's not much point to it, is there? The Founding Fathers had a reason to have juries, so the juries, as a last resort, could overrule the law, overrule the judge, overrule the prosecution, in order to keep the power of final conviction in the hands of the people, not the court system. So please remember this. If you're called to do jury duty, you are not obligated to do what the judge tells you to do. You can look at any evidence. You can basically ask your questions. They're doing that now in this case of the woman who stabbed her significant other 27 times. I wish one of those jurors would ask what prescription medications you're on. But the whole point of the jury is, as a last resort, to hold off bad law, bad application of law, unconstitutional law, prosecutorial and judicial misconduct. That's why juries are impaneled. That's why juries have that power. And we got to see that. It's happened in a couple of these notorious tax cases, where the jury will come back and say, near as we can tell, there was no law broken. Now remember one of these things where the judge said, okay, you're ready to go, and apparently the prosecutors from the Internal Revenue Service were screaming at the judge, you get that jury back and make them change their minds. Threw a tantrum right there in the courthouse. I would have paid money to see that video. Meanwhile, we have been talking a lot about the various, very obvious preparations for a militarized crackdown on the American people. Well, it's not just happening here in the United States of America. Apparently it's starting to happen up in Canada. They're preparing for martial law. The RCMP is now getting armored trucks to wave at us, to scare us with. Probably they're going to be getting the pain rays and heavy weapons. Because when the collapse comes, and it is obvious it has to happen, I know it's frustrating. Everybody says, we know it's coming. Let's just get on with it and have it happen. But the government keeps changing the rules they play by. The bankers keep changing the rules they play by to stave off final collapse. But it is only a matter of time. And when these collapses happen, we, the people of the United States of America, the people up in Canada, are going to realize the ultimate fault for this disaster lies with the government itself, who were tasked with keeping the economy under control. And they abandoned that. They got into bed with the money junkies, which is the classic sign of a fascist government. And when it all comes apart, they know we, the American people, are going to point the finger of blame where it belongs. With the government that looted your Social Security money to balance their bills, and now they can't pay it back. With the government that repealed Glass-Steagall in 1999 and just opened up the floodgates of bank fraud. The government that has refused to prosecute even a single case of bank fraud, mortgage fraud, foreclosure fraud to preserve the dignity and trustworthiness of the American financial system. The government that is even now trying to force our Ponzi scheme system of banking on the rest of the world at the point of a bayonet. We, the American people, are going to be, when the economy comes crashing down, we're going to stand up and say, you, people in Washington, D.C., you're all fired. Get out of our capital city. And they're not going to want to go. And that's why they're arming themselves. They're not really thinking of re-invading and conquering all 50 United States. They're getting ready to do what the collapsing power structure in the Soviet Union did. They're going to basically pull in around their little capital city, put a string of armor, and say, you can't get us. And my answer to that is, fine, keep the capital city. We'll just put up one of those big concrete walls all the way around it, and you can sit in there with your guns and your armored vehicles and your pretenses of power, and you can spend your time going to all those wonderful museums they have in that city and dealing with the inner city crime. And outside that wall, we'll just form a whole new nation. But we're seeing these things up in Canada as well. These money junkies do not want to relinquish that leech-like hold they have on your wallet. And as we pointed out before, in all wars are banker wars. The money junkies will not hesitate to see 100 million human beings killed to maintain their positions of automatic wealth and power. Because they don't do anything for all this money they're getting. They just game the system, or they're the children of people who game the system. This fraud, this scam, this Ponzi scheme bank's been going on for 100 years. The people who are getting rich off of it now didn't even create it. They just lucked out. They got born into the families of the scammers of 100 years ago. And they spend all their time trying to convince themselves that they're supposed to enjoy these exalted, enriched lives because they're the bastions of good taste and culture, and they are the masters of the universe, or God loves them, and wealth is the sign of the elect. And it isn't. They basically won a biological lottery, and that is all there is to justify their position. And they know it in their heart of hearts. And so fascism, when it starts to collapse, inevitably resorts to repression to prevent the inevitable correction that's going to happen in society. And that's what they're doing right now. But again, do you really see your average civil servant from like the Bureau of Land Management grabbing an AR-15 or an M16 and risking their own lives, manning the barricades to protect their bosses from an enraged American population? I don't see it happening. I don't see it happening at all. I don't even see the enraged Americans bothering with the National Weather Service or the Bureau of Land Management. Those are going to be agencies we're going to need in the new government. But they're definitely getting paranoid inside Sodom on the Potomac there. It really, really is. Now, over in Europe, workers have staged protests and demonstrations in 60 Spanish cities, protesting austerity and demanding political reform. Greece is now saying they can't go any further down the road of austerity. Even the pro-banker party is saying there's nothing left to austere with. And up in Germany, they're saying this signals the exit of Greece from the European Union and Greece's inevitable default on its debts, which will trigger those credit default swaps Wall Street recklessly sold against Europe's debt without having the cash reserves necessary to pay the claims. When those come due, it will be a firestorm on Wall Street that's going to make the Lehman Brothers collapse look like a minor road bump. And Wall Street will turn around to the U.S. government and say, please, we need another bailout. And the U.S. government will say to the Federal Reserve, print us up we need about another $100 trillion in instant bailout cash. And that will collapse the dollar because nobody wants the dollar anymore because its value, if it had any, is vanishing. For a very simple reason. Contrary to popular myth, which says the Federal Reserve note isn't backed by gold or silver of anything of value. Yes, it is. It's backed by your future slave labor. But because of the runaway bailouts, there's now a treasury bond bubble. There are not physically enough Americans to work and pay taxes to make good on all that paper. That's why they're stiffing retirees on their Social Security money. They literally can't cover their debts any longer. So, one way or the other, this is all going to come down. They're just waiting for the first spark. And, of course, the money junkies are out there saying, quick, start a world war. Get a war going so when it all gets really bad, we can blame the war. We can duck responsibility for being money junkies. We're poor, helpless addicts. We didn't mean to do wrong. You've got to feel sorry for us. We're actually starting to hear stuff like that. Amazing. So the global austerity resistance, indeed revolution, is continuing. It's accelerating. Tens of thousands of protesters, Spain and Greece. It's happening everywhere. We're tired of this money junkie Ponzi scheme banking system, and when we all stand up together as one world and kick out these private central banks, it literally will be a new era. Up in Germany, the latest polling is showing 25% of Germans will vote for the party that promised to quit the euro. Merkel is having conniptions. She's tearing her hair out right now. The anti-austerity, anti-euro sentiment is growing even in Germany. The Eurozone could come apart. And again, hanging over the heads of Wall Street like the sword of Damocles are those credit default swaps. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Here we got a caller on the line, Scott in Virginia. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Listen, I've got a question for you, a rhetorical one. How is it that we can, after basically 70 years of dominating world commerce, international commerce, end up with a $16 trillion debt, and China end up with a $3 trillion cash reserves, and they've only been in the game, the capital's game, for 30 years. We should be arguing right now how to invest the $10 trillion we have in cash reserves for emergencies such as wars or natural disasters. That's what we should be arguing about. But instead, we're talking about how to pay off a $16 trillion debt we should never have had. If that alone is enough for us to put an end to the Federal Reserve and our system of government for a better one. That's enough. You could take out 9/11. You could take out Vietnam. You could say that.
That's the reason we fought the revolution. That's the reason we fought the revolution, to get away from this style of banking. Our schools don't teach that anymore. They teach Tea Party and Stamp Act and the rest of it. But back in 1913, when the Federal Reserve came into being, public schools were instructed to stop teaching about King George III's Currency Act being the major cause of the American Revolution. And the reason our nation is struggling under such debt, and by the way, it's far worse than just $16 trillion. You're talking about the officially admitted U.S. federal government debt. But the reality is, when you add in the unfunded mandates and all of this money that has been used for all these bailouts on Wall Street, the total federal government debt is now estimated to be somewhere above $220 trillion. Plus add to it corporate and consumer debt, and you will see how out of control the system is. And the reason is very simple. Every nation that has a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest is hopelessly in debt, because by design, such a system always creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt. Through pyramid-type operations, that debt gets passed forward onto future generations, but it's always accumulating until it reaches the point where we are right now. And that is why that's why all these nations with this style of banking are hopelessly in debt. And you need to understand something about that debt. None of that money that is claimed to be owed ever actually existed. It is simply a bookkeeping entry that is created, like most of our money, out of thin air. And as long as we believe that this is the way life is supposed to be, we will be slaves to it. Just like people who believed in rule by divine right were slaves to that system. Or people who believed that slavery was okay were slaves to that system. This is just the newest form of slavery, and it is time for us to outgrow it as a race, as a civilization.
I know many Americans that somehow, this is going to get so bad, our debt's going to get so bad that we're just going to declare a nationwide bankruptcy and be free of it. No, that does not happen, because we have seen in the past, no matter how powerful a country is, it is always forced to pay its debts by the international bankers, whether that debt is legitimate or not.
Not always. I'll explain when we come back from station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And following up on that idea about nations dumping their debts, it does happen. The bankers don't want you to know about it, but it does happen. Governments will stiff on their debts. Following Vietnam, the U.S. agreed to war reparations. They never paid it. And that's why the North Vietnamese hung on to the POWs all those years. We know that Iceland simply wrote off much of their artificially created fictitious debt. And there's even a legal principle involved called odious debt, also known as illegitimate debt. This is a legal theory that the national debt incurred by a government for purposes that do not serve the best interests of the nation is not enforceable. And this goes all the way back to 1927, when this was formed out of Mexico's repudiation of all debts incurred by Emperor Maximilian. And then later on, when the United States got Batista into Cuba, they simply said Cuba is not liable for the debts incurred by the Spanish colonial regime. So this happens all the time. And the bankers don't want you to think about it. We've been hearing Christine Lagarde out there saying all debt is sacrosanct. You must always pay the debt. And of course, bankers and money junkies are going to say that. But the historical reality is, doesn't always happen. In fact, one of the odd things about these bankers financing these wars is they'll very often make a deal with the winner that if the loser can't actually pay their debts, the winner will agree to. And I know that sounds absurd, but when you realize all these wars are started for the bankers' benefit, to generate more debt, more wealth, and more control, it starts to make sense. But nations do walk away from their debts. And I think we, the American people, when this financial system comes crashing down, yes, we are morally obligated to repay money that was borrowed for our schools, bridges, roads, rail system, hospitals, infrastructure. And we should make an effort to repay that. But all this money borrowed to prop up Wall Street, to pay for the world's largest war machine, for TV cameras to spy on us, for all these agencies to read our email, why should we pay for that? Why should we be expected to repay the loans taken out for our own enslavement? And it follows, therefore, that all of these foreign nations that hold markers on U.S. soil should be told to go jump in a lake. Because remember, after Nixon ended gold convertibility, he was forced to collateralize further U.S. government borrowing with America's public lands. That's what the whole EPA movement was really all about. They wrapped it in environmentalism to get the green wackos on board with it. But it was about reserving pristine American lands with their mineral resources as collateral for further government borrowing. And that's something a lot of Americans don't understand. Our wilderness areas, our roadless zones, all of those various programs that they had to conceal the true scale of the land confiscation, all of those areas are pledged as collateral on government borrowing. But if the loan that those lands collateralized was for war and for repression of the American people, then those loans are odious and the collateralization should not be honored. And we need to understand that when this financial system and this government comes crashing down, we may get a fight from all these foreign note holders coming in and saying, look, we've got the collateral agreement. We've got the pink slip on the Sequoia National Park. We've got the pink slip on the Grand Canyon. It belongs to us now. All right, get a tow truck and haul it on out of there. Going to take a break for commercials. Back with a phone call after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And our caller dropped, and maybe he'll call back. I have a story here that when I saw just absolutely disgusted me. Just when you think it cannot get any more insulting to our returning veterans. This story comes along here. Apparently, there was a homeless veteran in the city of Houston who was digging through a dumpster trying to find some food. And he was ticketed by the Houston police because apparently Houston has an ordinance against feeding the homeless. In other words, this program that Claire and I volunteer for here on Oahu would be illegal if it was within the city limits of Houston. Houston doesn't want to deal with all those homeless people. We're too busy doing whatever Houstonites do. Now, this veteran, whether he knows it or not, went through what he went through, endured what he endured. For the bankers, for the profits. To force Iraq's oil back on the world market only for dollars. And he comes home, and the government just turns its back on him to the point where he's not even allowed to go digging in dumpsters for food, even though the corporate media only a month ago was holding this up as the ideal solution for Americans who are struggling to keep themselves fed in these hard economic times. Now, I understand that money junkies in every city in America don't want the homeless hanging around because it discourages shopping traffic and tourism. But maybe they ought to be dealing with the problem rather than just trying to shoo them someplace else. I don't think there should be a law anywhere in the United States of America making it a crime to feed the homeless and the hungry. That's absurd. What does that say about our national character that our politicians would even consider such a stupid law? Especially a veteran who went out there and put it on the line for America's imperialist economic agenda. Now, whether you agree with the wars or not, and I don't, We as a nation, including the government and the money junkies, do owe a debt to our returning veterans that we take care of them. Because they're coming back from the war zone damaged in one way or the other. And I don't mean just loss of limb or loss of life, tragic as those are. We know these people are coming back having been through a traumatizing experience, and the government doesn't hesitate to spend money to turn these young kids into kill-on-demand robots. But they do absolutely nothing to help them reintegrate back to civilian society. Plus, they're doped up on these SSRIs. We know they're being handed out like candies over there. The Pentagon spends more for antidepressants for the troops than they spend on the Black Hawk helicopters. Once these soldiers have been used up, they're simply thrown away into the streets. They can't find jobs, they can't find support, and now we have cities literally making it illegal for them to look in the trash dumpsters for food. The world is going to judge the United States, at least in part, by how it treats its most disadvantaged people, especially those who became disadvantaged in service to that very same U.S. government and banking system. The city of Houston ought to be ashamed for having written that ticket to this veteran. The city of Houston ought to be ashamed for even having such an absurd law. At the very least, take the financial costs of enforcing that law and use that same money to start feeding the homeless and hungry, and maybe the problem might go away. I think anybody in Texas ought to be ashamed that this is going on inside your border. Now then, I get angry when I hear things like that. I think everybody listening to this broadcast, if you have not already done so, take a moment, take a day, take a weekend, even just once, to go volunteer for a Feeding the Hungry program in your neighborhood. It's going to be your Buddha on the road moment when you have to look at this reality face to face. At these people who, through no fault of their own, are having to miss meals or have lost their homes. Contrary to the corporate media propaganda that these are all druggies and destitute and the rest of it. And there are a few, I will grant you. But the vast majority of the people who are showing up at these programs for surplus food, they're in dire need, and they don't deserve to be there. These are not bad people. They didn't do something wrong. These are people who were working within the system, who did as they were told, who tried to fill out all the paperwork, who worked hard, who went into debt to buy the American dream only to have the government take their high-paying jobs away so the banks could take away their homes to save themselves from insolvency. These are all the victims of America's financial system who are out there, and they're hungry. We have more people on food stamps than the entire population of Spain right now. How dare this nation have the pretense of being the greatest nation on earth when we have that many people who are going hungry in our borders? How dare this government send a single penny of tax money to a foreign nation while we have American women and children sleeping in alleys and eating out of trash dumpsters? We are not the greatest nation on earth, and we haven't been for quite some time. And the situation is getting worse. Now, over at Blacklisted News, interesting article, 11 Things the Obama Administration is Doing to Promote More Illegal Immigration. Now, whether this is a requisite step, and it probably is, for this grand design of a North American Union to counter the European Union, and we can see how well the European Union has worked out, so why are we trying to do the same thing? But they've opened up that southern border. They're now putting a lot of those border and customs agents on 2-week out of every month furloughs as part of the sequester cuts. The nation is being flooded with cheap labor that pays no taxes. 40% of all employees in Los Angeles County are now illegal aliens, paid in cash, paying no taxes. And the recruiters are out there offering instant citizenship to anybody who's going to sign up for the military and go kill the designated enemies. And it may sound good in theory in those policy meetings in Washington, D.C., but do you really think these instant Americans across the border from Mexico are going to have the emotional connection to the United States that military planners rely on to motivate their soldiers? Or are these instant citizens going to take their green card, go through the training, go into the war zone, and just cower in a hole while the bullets whistle over their heads? A waste of training, transportation, and materiel. Meanwhile, during the time that they're supposed to be working on a new budget and saving the economy, the Senate is now considering new legislation that would waive visa requirements for all Israelis. They're considering a bill that would exempt Israel from the rule on non-immigrant refusal rate, paving the way for easier entry into the U.S. Just come on in, Israelis. Only the Mexicans are getting a more open door coming into this country. Congress is handing your country, the United States of America, to Israel on an open plate. Netanyahu can get bills through the U.S. Congress faster than he can get them through the Israeli Knesset. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Uhuru Kenyatta won a narrow victory in Kenya's presidential election. This is a week after Kenyatta was accusing the British government of trying to influence the election in favor of his opponent, Odinga. Now, Kenyatta won by enough of a margin where there will not be a recount. Odinga is still screaming he's going to try and challenge it. But part of the new imperialism is this very bad habit of interfering in the elections of other countries. Whether it's Kenya, Greece, soon to be Italy. And again, there's nothing new. CIA has a long record of election rigging in other countries to get rid of rulers who will not do as they're told by the United States. And that's the reason why the United States has become perhaps the most hated nation on earth right now. Second only to possibly Israel. They don't hate us for our freedoms. They hate us because we're screwing around with their countries. And our government seems to think it's their divine right to mess around with other countries. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I want to talk about the gun grabbers. They're still going on. Despite overwhelming public opposition to any kind of infringement on our Second Amendment rights, the gun grabbers are still going at it. Again, to me, this is a sign of fear. They know they can't hold this Ponzi scheme pyramid together much longer. They're seeing what's been happening over in Europe with populations that, by and large, already were pretty much fully disarmed. And they're still trying to find some way to convince you, give us your guns, you can trust us, blah, 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 blah. By the way, speaking of trusting the police, the cannibal cop trial has now gone to the jury. I have a feeling they're going to come back pretty quick on this guy. Now, we have been hearing over the last several weeks that as more and more states are passing restrictions on magazine capacity, number of rails on the front of the gun, all kinds of things that will have absolutely no effect on the rates of crime, but would seriously impede the American people standing up against a government intrusion into their communities. We're seeing more and more companies that manufacture and sell guns and shooting supplies saying that they will not sell to the government anything that is not legal to sell to the general population. And the number of companies refusing to do that has now tripled in just the last 2 weeks. And so kudos to these companies who understand the Second Amendment, understand the issues that are at stake. I mean, at the very least, we know that a lot of criminals are getting their guns from breaking into police cars. Happened just a couple of weeks ago. We reported it on the show. Now, I understand for everybody who's on a federal government paycheck, whether it's a salary or a social program or food stamps or whatever, they don't want to hear about defense against tyranny. Their dependence on the federal government will make them staunch and loyal supporters of that government, no matter how many innocent Iraqis are tortured to death to find weapons of mass destruction that don't exist. So we need to put this debate about gun ownership strictly in the context of protecting yourselves. The police admit they won't be there for several minutes. You're on your own. We know that the police are rarely there to thwart a crime in progress. Common sense says we, the American people, have a legitimate right to keep and bear arms equal, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals. And that includes AR-15s, semi-automatic handguns with high-capacity magazines, because that's what the crooks have. They've been getting them from Fast and Furious. They have AKs out there. Meanwhile, over in California, they're really ramping it up there. They're considering a new round of gun legislation that would ban all semi-automatic guns. Period. End of discussion. Semi-automatic shotguns, semi-automatic handguns, semi-automatic rifles. They want you, next they'll be back saying, you know, you only need a muzzle loader. That's what they had back when the Second Amendment is signed. That's all you need right now. Even though the Supreme Court has already ruled otherwise. In United States versus Miller, the Supreme Court ruled the Second Amendment reserves to the American people whatever weapons the standing army currently has. So Californians are now planning a ban on all semi-automatics. Now, Representative Jan Schakowsky, Democrat from Illinois, she's a member of the Democratic Party's leadership at the House of Representatives, has suggested at a women's rights rally, implied that the current ban on assault weapons and private sales background checks is only the beginning of a much broader gun control agenda that will ultimately extend to handguns as well. This at a women's rights rally, even as the feministas are trying to wave rape crisis all over again. And they want to take away handguns. I don't see your average woman walking down the street carrying a shotgun as a protection against rape. Women have a need for handguns on their person. So do men. This is not about crime prevention. It's about disarming the American people. Taking away their right and their ability to say no. And after the guns, if they get them, they'll be coming for your gold and silver and anything else of value that will prop up the banking system a little bit longer. And then it will be for your children to lose their limbs and their lives in more wars to bring the blessings of our current economic model to the rest of the world. All righty. We got to take another break. We'll be taking Mike in Chicago as soon as we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call. Mike in Chicago. Aloha, Mike. Thank you for calling back. What's on your mind today?
Oh, not much. You're in full form. I love your show. And I thank you for your education for everybody. Like, you're just a godsend. Really, thank you very much for your, like I say, you're educating everyone in the country, anybody who tunes in. But anyway, I notice every day, there's no way that the stock market, especially the Dow Industrial 30 futures, is going to go down. I mean, there's, these rates are, in this monetization, this QE, it's just not going to allow it. I'm surprised gas is holding its $3.75 at the pump, and I'm really surprised to see gold is taking a hit, and that's going to be a real opportunity, I think, in the near future for sure, definitely.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Anytime the gold prices are being driven down, that's when the private central banks are buying, and that's when you should buy. Because the day-to-day changes and up and down, you should ignore that. Just look at how gold has increased in value since 1971. And that will tell you that gold is a great preserver of wealth. We're seeing all the big players like Soros are buying into it right now, and so should you. And that's why we keep promoting the Republic Trading Group. You ought to have at least a little silver and gold on hand as a wealth preserver, as barter, as a way to bribe yourself across a border if push comes to shove. There are all kinds of reasons to own silver and gold, and do try and acquire it in a way that does not leave a track so the government doesn't know to come knocking on your door, because I guarantee you, if they succeed in taking the guns, the next thing is going to be gold confiscation, just like they did in 1933. They're going to be coming for the gold and the silver and the platinum and the tantalum to prop up the banking system a little bit longer.
All right. Well, how about the Canadian maple? Would you be interested in something like that, or as far as would you be nervous about trying to resell it if that was the case? Do you have any comment on that?
Well, I wouldn't be nervous about reselling it. I certainly wouldn't be reselling it right now. The whole point of hanging onto the gold and silver is to be prepared for when the dollar really starts to hyperinflate and goes to a collapse. And again,
right.
at some point, they can't keep on gaming gold prices down and the stock market up. They're reaching a point where they're starting to devalue the dollar to the point where people they want to get away from it. If you adjust for inflation, you will see that the stock market, despite the high, impressive-looking numbers, has actually been losing value steadily since the year 2000.
Right, and if you measure that against gold, since oh God, help me with the date. Help me with the price. Since gold was $700-800 an ounce, let's just say, I remember when gold was $200 an ounce. But if you compare that to where if you take this 14,000 for example, the last time it was 14,000 is what I'm trying to say. I think you might have had a $700 or $800 level on the gold. Well, why the market should be 28,000 right now.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Absolutely. Gold has definitely outperformed the stock market when you adjust for inflation. Well, even without the adjustment for inflation. And so, again, we know it's all being manipulated. It started as a temporary political expediency back in the Clinton years, and now all these Wall Street investment firms and banks, they can't stop. Because there's so much of this stock on their balance sheets. They've got to keep the stock prices up or they're instantly insolvent. And they're going to do anything they need to, high-frequency trading. Federal Reserve will just quietly send tons of money over. In fact, most analysts are looking at the recent soar above 14,000 on the Dow, and they're saying it's all coming out of this quantitative easing from the Federal Reserve. That the Federal Reserve is practically handing the money out so that people can go into the stock market, keep buying, and keep those prices up. But, of course, the more they do that, the more they're undermining the dollar itself. So they're between a rock and a hard place, and it's just a question of which is going to happen first. Everybody bailing on the stock market or everybody bailing on the dollar?
Right. You know a guy named Mark Faber by chance?
I've heard of him, yes.
Yeah. He's been ostracized. He's been made fun of because you said gold was gonna continue to rally, and in the market, we're gonna have a debt crisis, But Mark Faber, he looks to real wealth. He looks to the person that actually produces something, like myself.
Yes.
I produce something that is of value, and I'm paid for it in Federal Reserve notes, which lose their value every day. So therefore, they're taking my savings and they're taking my yield. They're taking my labor that I actually produce something. I don't sit behind a computer and press buttons all day and leverage, 100 to nothing or one or whatever you want to say. I just don't do that. But when these bankers do it, I'm the one who has to pay. And Ron Paul knows exactly what I'm talking about, and I'm sick of it, and everybody else is too. So that we're just going to just keep getting our gold and hiding our guns. Nobody's going to take my gun, even though it's registered. I don't care. And that's all I got to say.
Well, you're absolutely correct. Ordinary Americans who actually produce something for a living, whether they're out there trying to grow their food in the farm fields, or they're laying roads, or they're building buildings, or whatever, are paying the price for all this quantitative easing. That money doesn't come out of thin air. It's all still technically a loan from the Federal Reserve to the government of the United States of America. And for all these $85 billion that the Federal Reserve is creating in order to give to the Wall Street to keep the stock market up, there are corresponding treasury bonds being issued by the federal government, which commits future generations of taxpayers to work and turn over work product without anything coming back in exchange for it to redeem those treasury bonds. Second, of course, all of this runaway money creation is destroying the value of the money you already worked for, put in your pocket, put in your savings account, buried in that mayonnaise jar out by the tree. And the reality is they're robbing you. It's just another way of transferring real wealth from the American people onto the bankers to prop up a failed system. Now, I understand what Mark has been through in terms of the ridicule and ostracization, and I understand how frustrating it is to be making forecasts and predictions about what's going to happen, but you need to understand a very fundamental reality. Those of us on the outside of the system who are trying to get a bead on what's going to be happening in the near future, we're basing our analysis on the rules as they currently exist. And what makes so many of these forecasts unsure is the reality that the government and the bankers will just change the rules whenever they feel they need to. And so we're trying to basically do a forecast based on the rules, while those that we are trying to predict what they're going to do are changing the rules as they go along here. It's like trying to be a weather forecaster and the physics of evaporation and wind start changing randomly. It's going to make your already flaky weather forecast that much worse. But that's really when the critics are out there saying, oh, you were predicting this and you were predicting that, and it didn't come to pass. We understand that. But our forecasts and our warnings and predictions were based on a world operating on the rules that the government and the bankers set up. And what we cannot predict is when the bankers and the government are just going to change the rules to suit themselves. And at that point, all of the forecasts are going to go out. But in the long-term general trend, obviously as long as they pursue their current policies of enrichment, personal aggrandizement, it has to break at some point. They're just changing the rules to deal with each new crisis, but at some point there will be a crisis that no rule change is going to be able to repair. And that's when it's all going to come crashing down. We know it. The government knows it. That's why they're arming themselves against an enraged American population, because Americans are finally, when it all comes crashing down, all the denial is going to evaporate. All the suppressed rage is going to surface. All those people who are on SSRIs are going to be in cold turkey withdrawal, and they're going to go absolutely nutso. And that's what's going to happen. And the government's preparing for that because they don't want to quit. They're not responsible enough. They're not going to take personal responsibility for all this. They're busy blaming somebody else. It's somebody else's fault, or it's God's will. And we're going to go on because we're the government and we have to preserve the American nation, meaning themselves. Well, the American nation isn't in Washington, D.C. The American nation is in the 50 states, in the cities, in the communities, in the counties. We're the United States of America. It says so right at the top of the Constitution. We the people.
And Michael, you should talk about this Obamacare is going to affect small business. I've been just trying to look into it a little bit myself, but I guess the definition of full time is 30 hours. So why don't they just get rid of, instead of paying these huge fines because they can't afford the health insurance, just hire a bunch of temporary people. That's just going to make the economy worse.
Yeah, they're already doing it. They're already doing it. They're already doing it. And in fact, over the weekend, I was commiserating with some of my fellow computer animation visual effects people regarding a company called Rhythm and Hues in Hollywood that was started by many of the people I worked with at Robert Abel & Associates many, many years ago. And these are good people. And they are pioneers in the industry, and they've done a lot of good work over the years. They've been driven into bankruptcy now. And we're going to see that happen all across because all of a sudden companies that were just barely making it are getting hit with these mandated health insurance requirements or these fines, and they're having to let full-time people who are well-trained and experienced in this line of work to hire some temps just out of computer animation school. The really knowledgeable, experienced people are going to be seeking good positions in foreign countries, so the brain drain in the industry is on. And it's the start, and they're getting so ridiculous. Now they're talking about an Obamacare tax on tablets and smartphones because they might be used to run medical applications. We know there's a lot of medical apps for iPhone. Doctors love the things, and they're being integrated with their hospital system. So now they're saying there's going to be an Obamacare tax and fee on that. You cannot tax a nation to prosperity. You can only tax it into collapse, and that's what they're doing.
Wasn't there a hidden tax on fishing poles and sporting goods and stuff like that in there too? Somebody, I don't know if it was on RBN or was another host was mentioning that. It might have been another host, but it was another sneaky tax, like at one of these, not Dick's, but Granger, or one of these sporting goods. So if you look at your receipt, there's there's an excise tax down there. That was associated with Obamacare, but I can't really prove that. But that's, it doesn't surprise me that they're gonna, once they get their foot in the door, they're just gonna come breaking it down with all these extra taxes. Oh boy, this penalty really gets to me. That's forcing me, to buy into the Western system that's broke. I mean, it's already failed. Why would I want to buy into something that's failed? And most of these drugs, people don't even realize they're putting their lives at risk. Well,
it's just the rot has spread throughout our entire society between the medical industrial complex and the security industrial complex, and so forth. And there are lots of hidden taxes and fees. You'd be surprised how many are on things like gasoline and tires, there are more and more of these coming along. If you look at your cell phone bill, you're being charged an additional fee to pay for the program where Obama gives free cell phones to, I guess, the illegal aliens. And it's bread and circuses time is really what it's come down to. And it's over and above being forced to pay for things you don't agree with. It makes you an accessory to all these war crimes the government is carrying out. When you pay a tax to the government, any tax, even a sales tax, you're paying for the torture of innocent Iraqis to death, to find weapons of mass destruction that don't exist, rendition, all of the abuses at Gitmo, the erosion of the Bill of Rights. You're being forced to pay for all of that. It makes you an accessory after the fact. I can't imagine Americans really being comfortable with that.
Yeah, America has to wake up because essentially it's so ludicrous. They want us to pay for our own debt, and our own liberty, our own
enslavement. Yeah, we're being asked to pay for our own jail cells.
Oh, it's terrible. Thank you, Michael, and God bless. Thank you for your every day your show to help people understand what's going on. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the call. Now, getting back to the Second Amendment issues. As more and more states and counties and cities are trying to pass gun grabber legislation, rather surprisingly, knife supporters are getting laws regarding the carrying of knives loosened up. And I was a little alarmed to find out there's a lot of places in the United States where carrying a Leatherman tool in the open is now considered actionable. But a lot of those laws are being overturned, and I think it's being reflected in the TSA policy that I can now take my Swiss Army knife onto the airplane, past TSA. And it's provoked a bit of a controversy, and maybe it's a planned distraction. Oh, pocket knives are now the big thing everybody's talking about, while we're not supposed to look at something else. But apparently knife supporters are now going to be allowed to have sheath knives, lockbacks, whatever, on their belts, which are useful. And I know there's a type of knife where you push the button one way, the blade opens, you push the button the other way, the knife closes. And I've had one of those, not for violence or anything, but they are very useful. If you've got a package in one hand and you need to cut the tape and you don't want to put an open knife back in your pocket, they're actually very useful, but they're considered illegal now. You're supposed to use the official box cutter, but not on an airplane here. But we're seeing a lot of towns starting to say that maybe they went overboard on all these laws about knives, and there is a Second Amendment implication, because that Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It doesn't say firearms, it says arms. That includes knives, swords, axes, clubs. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Dan the Man is now in our control room, twiddling the dials, answering the phones. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Now, we have also been talking about all of this extreme silliness where teachers in schools are suspending students for pointing a finger and going bang, drawing a picture of a gun, reshaping their Pop-Tart to look like a gun. They're going out and saying cops and robbers are no longer allowed on the playground, taking toy soldiers off of cupcakes, completely over the top, overboard, nonsensical stuff. In Maryland, they're considering a law which has been nicknamed the Toaster Pastry Gun Freedom Act, saying that educators' reactions should be confined to real instances of guns or aggressive behavior, and not punishing kids merely for using their imagination. So there's a bit of a backlash against that as well. Had a gun show down in San Diego, specifically in Del Mar, on March 9th. The line to get into it was a mile long. Everybody understands what's getting ready to happen. Now then, let's see. Back up here. Interesting little article that came out of antiwar.com on how the neocons and the Obamaites united against Rand Paul. And it was rather interesting to see the unanimity in opposition regarding his trying to make an issue of the drone strikes. And it shows just how compromised the leadership of both of these parties has become by the war machine, by Israel, by AIPAC. Certainly you would have, in times past, expected the Democrats to get up there and scream and holler about the unconstitutionality of drone strikes against Americans inside the United States. I would have thought of that of the Republicans as well, but they're cool with it, apparently. I guess they've been promised that nobody they know will be on that list that Obama has of people that we're going to kill because they might be inconvenient to us in the future. This is the era of preemptive U.S. government policy. It's like pre-crime, right out of that movie, Minority Report. We're going to lock you up, or in this case, we're going to drone strike you because of something we think you might be getting ready to do. No day in court, no presumption of innocence. I got a lot of emails from people taking me to task over this drone issue, saying, are we supposed to wait until they do something wrong to react? I said, yeah, because that's what America is founded on. You don't punish people for what they think or even what they say. You punish actual criminal behavior. Going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back after a couple of minutes. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Jeb Bush is already making noises about a potential run for the White House in 2016 because Obama will be ending his second term and the Oval Office will be in play. And we're hearing Hillary is considering a run as well. It's like all they're thinking about is the next campaign, the next campaign. They're too busy to actually do the job for the American people. They just sell out to the bankers and go back to their next campaign. Rand Paul is saying that he might run after his short time in the U.S. Senate. After all, worked for Obama. Jeb Bush is basically saying he doesn't think he's carrying any of the Bush baggage. Yeah, he is. Because of the massive vote fraud in Florida, 2000, that he was in charge of, the very strange declaration of a state emergency and martial law in Florida just a couple of days before 9/11. Yeah, Jeb, you've got the baggage, and we will be reminding America about it. I'm toying with the idea of throwing my hat in the ring in 2016. Presidential candidate from the blogosphere. I'm going to run under the slogan, he could hardly do any worse. And certainly, you're going to know that I am not beholding to Israel. I am not going to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem as the first act of my campaign. So I'm going to be thinking about that a little bit. Get some buttons made up or something like that. Worked for Pat Paulson. On a more serious note, last night, Claire and I were watching HBO, and we saw their new movie, Game Change, about the Sarah Palin campaign for vice president and interactions with John McCain. And the only reason we watched it is that it was the only thing that was on the cable system that we hadn't already seen 16 times before. That was the only reason we tuned in. Now, I'm not sure how accurate this telling is, although it certainly seems consistent with what we saw independently during the Palin campaign. That she was absolutely clueless about actual policy, that she was chosen because she was a pretty face and a great actress, and it got to her head. Now, if this story is accurate, it tells us a very great deal about what's gone wrong with American politics, where the candidates are really little more than store mannequins with pretty clothes and good public relations, and they're not really all that capable. It may have been a hatchet job on Sarah Palin to make sure that she does not come back in 2016, because it just buries her as a potential candidate. Julianne Moore did a great job as Sarah Palin. Ed Harris was McCain. Woody Harrelson, boy, he was great as Steve Schmidt, campaign manager. But it absolutely buries Sarah Palin as a potential candidate in 2016. Maybe that's its purpose. But as I mentioned earlier in the show, considering some of John McCain's recent statements about gun rights, about you don't need an AR-15, you just need a shotgun and shoot it through the door to protect your home. It's not like he was all that capable or smart either. And it may be that all of our candidates are just these manufactured celebrity personalities that are being controlled like puppets from behind the scenes. And it gets back to a question I raised before. We talk about all these members of Congress and the White House who are under the control of and beholden to pro-Israel lobbies like AIPAC. We need to start looking at those staffers behind them who actually run the offices in Congress and shuffle the paperwork around and set the agenda. It's time to look at how many of them are compromised by a foreign government. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're getting a story. This is over at Newsmax.com. Obama to Jewish leaders, stop chest beating over Iran. And the story is reporting that Obama has promised a group of Jewish leaders he will stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Not that Iran is trying to get nuclear weapons. But he said it's time to refrain from extra chest beating as he pursues a diplomatic solution. Now, I think the reason for this is twofold. One, they still want to sell this idea that they're seeking a diplomatic solution when we understand the real goal is to get an invasion of Iran going, to put Iran's oil back on the world market for dollars only, and to break Iran into little tiny pieces that no longer are a political threat to Israel by being a unifying force in the Middle East. That's the real agenda. But I think Obama has come to recognize that all of Netanyahu's screeching about Iran's weapons of mass destruction are only underscoring the fact that Iran is pushing for this invasion just like they pushed for Iraq. And Americans are tired of seeing their young men and women in uniform coming back missing important parts of their body, or even worse, in one of those cheap metal boxes in wars that appear to be entirely directed by Israel. And Obama needs to regain the illusion, if you will, that the United States is in control of this process in order to preserve what remains of the petrodollar deal. Because when the rest of the Middle East oil nations finally come to the conclusion that the United States cannot control Israel, and that in fact Israel is controlling the United States, the petrodollar deal is gone. They will start selling their oil for whatever currencies of real value they can find in the world, and the dollar will collapse. So Obama's just trying to sort of keep the illusion going that he's in charge. And it's not going to work because I think Israel's reached the point of thinking they can't get that much more out of the United States. It's time to let them go and leap onto a new host. Canada obviously having been groomed as the replacement here. Meanwhile, Israel is going to have a force of 10,000 police guarding and protecting Obama during his 3-day visit next week. Now remember, they were floating the idea that Hamas is planning to try and attack Obama while he visits the Temple Mount. I don't for a second believe Hamas would do something that stupid. I don't believe that at all. Hamas needs the support of ordinary American people. And Palestine's getting it. We're seeing boycott, divest work all across this country. Israel's political legitimacy is in decline. They're more and more isolated. Hamas is not going to do anything that will anger the American people. Israel could very easily do something and blame the Palestinians for it to try and anger America back on Israel's side against the Palestinians and the evil Arab Muslim terrorists. Israel could conceivably whack Obama to make Joe Biden president of the United States of America, and Joe Biden could run for re-election in 2016. A lot of advantages from Israel's point of view. So if you're part of the Secret Service protective detail guarding Obama over there as he travels in Israel, you lay off that Everclear, because that was the mistake your boys did in Dallas the night before Kennedy got it. Meanwhile, Israeli settlers are deliberately training dogs to attack Palestinians. It's another sign of racism and apartheid. We saw the same thing in the South in the United States, where white dog owners would hire a black man to beat up puppies, so the puppies would grow up into a dog that automatically attacked anybody with a black skin. And now the illegal settlers are doing the same thing. We've been reporting on how the settlers are destroying the olive groves of the Palestinians. And it takes 10 years to regrow a tree to the point where it can bear a saleable crop. This is economic warfare. Basically, Israel's government has given the settlers the green light for a program of ethnic cleansing, to just find some way to drive them out and take over their land. Now, meanwhile, the Arab League is urging that it's time to retrieve Palestinian relics stolen by Israel. And the Arab League is calling on international cultural organizations to try and find all the Palestinian books and historical relics stolen by Israeli occupation authorities and scattered to the four corners. Israel will burn them before they return them. Israel cannot tolerate any evidence of Palestinian culture that challenges the politically necessary myth that the land has always belonged to Israel. Remember when Israel was being formed, they said it's a land without a people for a people without a land. And it was an absolute lie. And I went back and I dug out that story from not too long ago about how this Palestinian cultural organization that was operating down in Australia in order to not be attacked by Israel's military, how they put together a traveling exhibit of Palestinian embroidery, because traditional Palestinian embroidery is rather amazing to behold. And they put together this traveling exhibit, and when it was in the Los Angeles International Airport inside all the new security after 9/11, and the entire exhibit simply vanished. It was waiting to be loaded on a flight to go up to Alaska, and it simply vanished from inside the most secure area at the Los Angeles airport. Because Israel does not want any physical evidence that there was a Palestinian people or a Palestinian culture. Even as they're trying to proclaim their constant stewardship of the land with these phony archaeological artifacts like the temple pomegranate, the Jehoash tablet, and various other fakes, which even Israel's government has now had to denounce were clumsy fakes. Israel uses archaeology for political purposes. And the archaeology is subject to skewing for political purposes, just like climate was subject to political skewing, to sell carbon taxes and global obedience to a global environmental authority. We have seen hundreds of examples throughout history of politics trying to control science, rather than the science controlling the politics, which is the way it should be. By the way, on Friday, April 9th, 1948, of course, is when the Arab village of Deir Yassin was attacked by Irgun and the Stern Gang. More than 100 men and women and children were massacred. More of them were wounded. They're going to have the 2013 commemoration taking place in Britain. And no doubt Israel will be sending their representatives to say, oh, we had to kill them. We had to, yes, it's wrong for other nations to engage in genocide and massacres, but we had a legitimate reason to do it. So they're going to be doing that whole situation here. Alrighty, let's see. The business of war is profitable. Most of the U.S. economy is in decline, but in 2011, the 100 largest military contractors sold $410 billion in arms and military services. Just 10 of those companies, the top 10, accounted for more than half of that. So wars are big business. The machinery of death and spying on the American people is big business. Everything else, it's time to admit it. We're on a wartime economy. They don't want to admit it, but that's the reality. Other sectors of the economy are being starved to death to keep funding the war machine. This whole sequestration deal is all about preserving military spending and transferring all the budget cuts onto the American people. Like I said, the U.S. Congress is going to fund Israel's Iron Dome missile system ahead of Head Start for America's kids. Remember that memo that surfaced where the Obama administration said, make the sequestration cuts as visible and painful as possible to prove that we were right? Well, now we're getting word that the U.S. Navy is going to end the Blue Angels air shows. They cut the Thunderbirds last week, now it's the Blue Angels. So all the people who go to air shows to see these demonstrators, they're all going to be saying, oh, it was those gosh darn sequester cuts. We've got to support the government's call for higher taxes. Not seeing any cuts to Wall Street, not seeing any cuts to the military, not seeing any cuts to Israel. They're deliberately targeting these cuts where it'll be most seen and felt by the American people, to scare them into agreeing to higher taxes and lowered services. By the way, interesting little story coming out of Russia today. Apparently the Pentagon somebody in the Pentagon leaked a memo from the Defense Department's Director of the Operational Test and Evaluation Directorate to the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And it prefaces a report on the F-35 saying that it will not stand a chance in real combat. That even training missions cannot be safely performed on board that aircraft at this time. It'll kill its pilots. It is the biggest, most expensive weapons boondoggle in American history. can't fly in the rain or the electrical system starts screwing up. The helmet-mounted fire control system still hasn't been delivered. The entire fleet happens to be grounded because of engine problems. The naval version can't land on carriers because they put the arrestor hook too close to the landing gear, and on and on and on. This plane cost more than the gross domestic product of Australia to develop. And now the Pentagon is saying it won't win in combat. It's probably going to kill a lot of pilots just during training. Going to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the corporate media right now is reporting on this terrible auto accident where 6 teenagers in an SUV have been killed in a horrible auto accident. So I think it is time to deal with this senseless death for the children. It is time to ban cars. I mean, have you ever noticed that? Anytime a kid gets killed with a gun, we got to ban all guns. But when kids die in a car, oh, it's a horrible tragedy. Life must go on here. Now, I don't mean to trivialize the pain and suffering of the parents and family of these kids. It's a horrible accident. But why is this national news? This is, let's be honest, it's fluff. Unless you are in that town and know those family and those kids, it's not really affecting your life. This is more of the fluffy, tabloid contentization that we've been seeing from the corporate media. There's stuff happening out there they don't want to talk about. So we're getting more and more of this tabloid-style news. And CNN wonders why their ratings are continuing to plunge. Now, we were talking the other day about how this town of 2000 had installed speed cameras that in the space of just a couple of months had racked up something like 6,000 speeding tickets. And people were wondering what the heck is going on. Apparently this has now gone to court, and a judge in Ohio is calling this whole thing a scam. And he's absolutely right. When you have speed cameras that are cranking out the tickets that fast, it's not about speeding, it's not about traffic safety, it's about another way to pillage the people to keep the local government going. We went through that here in Hawaii. They finally got rid of them. They caught these cameras were being set too sensitive. A lot of people were getting tickets that did not actually deserve them. They rely on most people just paying the tickets because they don't want to take a day off from work to go to court and say, look, I did not actually do what this camera said that I did. Because the presumption is, oh, the computerized cameras would never lie. And then they find out that, yeah, the companies that manage these things and get a piece of the action do misadjust them. Now, the economy right now, another indicator, things are very, very bad. 60% of Americans aren't even trying to save for retirement. They're relying on Social Security. Boy, is that a big mistake. Social Security is full of IOUs the government can no longer pay. And your 401ks and IRAs, assuming they are not destroyed in a coming market correction, the government's getting ready to take those away and have a new government-managed retirement program that will have a specially issued Treasury bond to provide for your retirement. Well, considering how badly they mismanage Social Security, nobody in their right mind is going to give up their private retirement fund accounts for a new government-managed program. Of course, the government is planning that you will not have a choice, just like you didn't have a choice over Obamacare. Once they get the guns, you will do what you're told to do, like the obedient little slaves that they all hope you are. Now, turning over to the church, conclave is going to start tomorrow. They've got all the cardinals there, and they've been having meetings, and they're going to have the conclave tomorrow. The bookmakers are already out there saying who's going to be the new pope, and a lot of people are focusing on Boston's Cardinal Sean O'Malley as a possible contender. And he's not only American, would be the first American pope, he's also Irish. And a lot of people are saying he would make a good one. There's one other cardinal from the United States that's considered in the running as well. And it's kind of funny. I thought the imaginary playmate in the sky got to choose. Or maybe once they're in conclave, they just have a wrestling match, and whoever wins best 3 falls out of 5 gets to be the Pope. But seriously, although the child molestation scandal is global, the greatest financial losses to the church have been here in the United States of America. And the conclave might pick an American pope in the hopes that this might sort of blunt the damage. I don't think that's going to work because my understanding is most lawyers in the United States of America aren't Catholic. But that might be a factor. So we'll be tuning in and looking for the white smoke or the black smoke or the green smoke or whatever it is they're going to be pouring out of the Sistine Chapel there. Now, reported in rawstory.com, a top French cardinal says not to put all the blame on the church for the sex abuse. And he's saying blaming the Catholic Church is a way of avoiding the issue that this is widespread. Well, never said it wasn't. And I've gotten a lot of very nasty emails from people saying, how dare you pick on the Catholic Church? You never talk about the Protestants or these or that other people. And as a matter of fact, quite the opposite is true. I make a point every time clergy of any religion gets caught engaging in these activities. I'll put it up on my website, and I'll talk about it on the show, and I will comment. This is for all the people who think I'm only picking on the Catholics. The reason there's so much of it around the Catholics is the problem seems to be more widespread there. And it isn't just the molestation, it's the cover-up that has caused the problems. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Interesting article just coming out of Business Insider about how Silicon Valley poverty is getting much, much worse amidst insane new tech wealth boom. And the story is coming out here that Silicon Valley is doing great. Their stock prices are up. Their earnings are supposedly up. And yet for everyday average people in Silicon Valley, there's massive poverty, homelessness, hunger, food stamp use. And they're trying to say, how do we reconcile the two? And they're saying, oh, well, it's the high cost of living. And yes, that's a factor. But I would suggest that possibly Silicon Valley's stock market boom is simply riding the tails of what we know to be manipulation of the stock market. And possibly they're being less than completely honest about their earnings, and possibly because Silicon Valley is doing all of their manufacturing in other countries now. And yes, there are jobs in Silicon Valley, but like jobs all across America, they're available for much lower wages and salaries than had been the norm during the big tech boom. So this article appears to be making excuses about why the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And I don't think anybody's really buying this at all. Now, over the weekend, Whole Foods announced that they're going to go to a policy of labeling GMOs in their stores. And they say the plan to have labels on all the products will be completed by 2018. It's going to take a little while for them to sort of soothe ruffled feathers with some of their suppliers. But they've made that decision. And Whole Foods cited customer concern as the major reason for their change in policy, because when this whole Prop 37 GMO labeling thing was first coming up, it came out that Whole Foods, despite its advertised image of all natural, was in fact selling products made with GMO content and was not labeling them. And worse, was telling the clerks in their stores to sort of evade the issue. And what this change in policy shows us is the corporations are beginning to react to the growing public concern over GMO. And that if you go into your markets and you say, I am not going to buy GMO products, nor will I buy a product that might have GMO in it. I will only buy products that are labeled as not having GMO at all. And at some point, those stores, rather than risk losing you to their competition, are going to start labeling. And now that Whole Foods is going to have GMO labeling, all of the other alternative food stores, like Down to Earth, will start doing the same. Down to Earth is pretty good about that already. But they'll all come on board, and then eventually the main supermarkets are going to have to do it. This next election, we're going to see a lot more states with mandatory GMO labeling, and Monsanto will try the same thing in those states they did in California. But it doesn't matter. If customer pressure causes the stores to start labeling, what's Monsanto going to do? Say, we refuse to sell you our corn? Yeah, it's kind of the whole point. Now, apparently, one of Germany's biggest brewers, in fact, the biggest brewer in all of Bavaria, Oettinger, is now producing beer free from genetically modified ingredients. They're banning GM from all of their products. So there's, if you're into foreign imported beers, Oettinger. Oettinger. It's in Bavaria. All of their beer from now on is being made without GMO content. Now, I know a lot of people are wondering, what's the big deal about genetic modification in a product made from the GMO crop? Doesn't DNA dissolve above a certain temperature? And yes, it does. Now, the rungs of the DNA ladder break apart very easily, and that's necessary for DNA replication. But those side genomes can survive a much higher temperature, and they can literally spontaneously reform the DNA in solution from floating proteins. That's how DNA replication works. But even if the DNA is destroyed, the concern about GMO foods is the protein expression, that while it was still alive, the altered DNA was creating new proteins and enzymes that are different and that can survive cooking or boiling and get into your body. Some enzymes are virtually indestructible. I remember when I was with JPL, one of the proposed life sciences mission for Viking didn't go, involved looking for an enzyme called porphyrin, which is an enzyme produced by biological activity as it's known here on Earth, and it's virtually indestructible. And it's a very reliable way, if you're taking a soil sample, of determining whether anything was alive in it at any time going back billions of years. The reason it was scrubbed from Viking was the understanding that indigenous life on another planet may not produce porphyrin, therefore it was unreliable. But some of these enzymes coming out of these genetically modified crops could be alien to your biochemistry and survive the cooking, brewing, biological process. That's the concern there. Meanwhile, even as the Carbonazis last week were ramping up their global warming fish story and saying the world is getting warmer faster, we're on the edge of collapse, blah, 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 blah. Winter weather has put northern France on alert. And remember, spring is supposed to be arriving right now. And they got hit with another major winter storm. They put 4 more departments of northwest France on orange alert. That's their second highest warning level for snow and ice. They put 10 on alert earlier in the same day. Sweden has been hit by unusually low temperatures. They are now 10 degrees Celsius colder than normal for this time of year, with experts predicting that these unusually low readings are going to stick around for at least another week. Now, we have this gentleman by the name of Hansen who was out there talking about the takeoff point. When Earth's CO2 level hit 350 parts per million, global temperatures would explode upward. Well, Earth has now hit that magic number, and global temperatures have not soared, they are going down. So this idea that global temperatures were linked to carbon dioxide is dead on arrival, although the carbon Nazis are still out there trying to sell it as hard as they can because they want that carbon tax. Obama's talking about a carbon tax to fight global warming, even as we hit yet another record-setting winter. Now, as I mentioned last week, NASA has finally acknowledged that the 2013 solar maximum does not appear to be happening. There's this 22-year cycle going from minimum solar activity to maximum solar activity. And the last time astronomers observed that the sun was not showing a lot of sunspots for a long period of time was the Maunder minimum, which coincided with the Little Ice Age of Europe. And it looks like we're going into another one. Carbon dioxide does not determine Earth's climate. Solar activity does, as well as the oscillation of the Earth's orbit from circular to elliptical to circular. And when it's elliptical, we get the ice ages. When it's circular, we get the interglacial periods. And reliable observations of the sun and its cycles have only been possible for 100 years. There may well be, probably are, much longer cycles in solar activity that science simply has not recognized yet, that would explain the Maunder minimum and the new minimum. We don't really know all that is going on in the sun. It is merely arrogance and the global warming agenda that says, yes, the sun is not a factor. It's that big hot thing up in the sky has nothing to do with the Earth's climate, which is extremely absurd. We know that during periods of low solar activity, more cosmic rays will reach the Earth's atmosphere. More cosmic rays will trigger more cloud formation. CERN has confirmed this with their accelerators. And the more clouds that are formed, the more sunlight is reflected back into space without warming the Earth, and the Earth cools. It's that simple. And until Al Gore and his cult of the Goracles can control the sun or change the shape of the Earth's orbit, we're going to get warming and cooling, warming and cooling, warming and cooling. It's been happening long before humans were here. It's going to go on long after we've been replaced by whatever's going to evolve to take over. It's a scam. Human-caused global warming was a scam to trick you out of carbon credit money, to trick you into buying environmentally products that cost more and deliver less, to trick you into obedience to a proposed global environmental authority that would tell you how to set your thermostats, how much gas you can have, how much room you can have in your home, to trick you into making do with less so the money junkies can have more, all to save planet Earth from you icky-poo human beings. Now, speaking of scams, you probably remember not too long ago where taking an aspirin every single day was promoted as a means to prevent a heart attack. They even had a special ideal dose aspirin you could buy. Take one every single day. Ooh, billions of dollars coming into the aspirin companies from that one. Then they finally realized that while taking an aspirin is going to help people who've already had a heart attack, for people who didn't actually have heart problems, it not only was not effective, but a steady diet of aspirin actually has medical consequences. So that kind of went away. Well, the aspirin companies aren't going to take that standing up or sitting down. And so now they have a new report out saying a daily aspirin will help you prevent cancer. And I don't think we ought to take that one any more seriously than the one about aspirins were going to stop heart attacks. It's just another sales pitch. Meanwhile, the CDC is warning of a new virus appearing in the Middle East. It's a coronavirus, the same family of virus as the common cold and SARS. And this one has sprung up in the Middle East. Is now being seen in Great Britain. It's kind of like Stuxnet. That sort of sprang up in Iran, but it's now spread all over the world. And remember, we were talking last week about this Pentagon program. An actual video of a presentation in the Pentagon got leaked about starting a virus pandemic in the Middle East to scare everybody to get a vaccine, which was actually designed to genetically alter the part of the brain that feels religion. in order to discourage Islamic religious fundamentalism. Except that Islam's resistance and hostility to America isn't really based on religion. It's based on the United States coming in and messing with their countries, and they're tired of having that happen. But that's what the Pentagon is thinking about. If you have a behavior they don't approve, they're going to trick you into taking a vaccine that will change your mind, make you more trusting of the government, make you hate the independent media, make you vote the straight party line, make you love your banker. Whatever. We're in the era of forced government alteration of your brain. Better things for better living through chemistry. It's right out of Aldous Huxley and Brave New World. And they're really talking about it. And they have the technology to do it. Alrighty. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a company called Cree. They are a company in the United States of America. I think they're in South Carolina. And they have come out with a new LED light bulb that looks like an incandescent tungsten bulb, will fit in the same sockets under the same lyres. That's the part that holds the lampshade. It's a problem with the Philips. It's dimmable, and they're in the price range of $10 to $15. And it's coming with a 10-year guarantee. This is something we need to look at, and I'm going to go down. They're going to be carried by Home Depot in-store starting later this month. Out here in Hawaii, maybe another couple of weeks after that. I'm going to get one of these. I've had 2 of the Philips LED bulbs. I've had them a little over 6 months. Not a single problem with either of them. And I'm going to look at this Cree bulb, because we all know those compact fluorescents are dangerous. They can short out. They can start fires. We had one that had partially shorted out and was actually drawing 10 times as much current as it was supposed to, was running very, very hot. I only discovered it by accident. We know if you break one, it's filled with mercury vapor and a radioisotope. These LED lamps are the way to go. Safe, power efficient, green, well done. But this company apparently they're winning Energy Star compliance. And it's an American company. I hope they're manufacturing in the United States, but they are located here in the United States of America. And getting these bulbs into the $10 and $15 price range makes these practical for ordinary Americans. As soon as they're available, I'm going to get one, put it in a lamp, and get back to you about that. But I think this is a great idea, and we have to applaud an American company for coming up with this. So that's Cree, C-R-E-E, the LED bulbs. They're going to be in Home Depot. Yes, I know it's a plug, but it's time to get these compact fluorescents out of our home because they're very poisonous and they're very dangerous. They have a high failure rate, and these LED bulbs are definitely the way to go. 10-year guarantee. I might not even last that long. I don't have a 10-year guarantee on me. Having a light bulb that's going to outlast me, having a wristwatch that's going to outlast me, that's kind of comforting at my age. I don't want to have to worry about it ever again. I want to put it in that socket, turn it on, and not have to think about it ever again. That's a very calming, tranquilizing kind of thing here. Just a reminder, and in relation to that Bavarian brewery banning GMO, we put a link back to that French study about GMO corn causing horrifying tumors and females dying early that Monsanto arm-twisted everybody to ignore. Now the Russians are replicating that study. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Little bit of good news for those of you who like your giant-sized sodas in New York. One day before it was due to go into effect, a judge has tossed out Mayor Bloomberg's ban on large sugary soda drinks. So the nanny got slapped around a little bit. And I don't think Bloomberg really cares one way or the other. We know what Bloomberg is doing. He's got 50,000 homeless inside his city. He's got an economy in decline. He can't fix the real problems. So he goes out and he makes an issue out of just something nonsensical like large sugary drinks or 2-liter bottles of soda with pizzas. And he makes a big deal about that and says, this is a situation that must be dealt with, and I, your mayor, will deal with it. So it looks like he's still relevant and he still has something valid to do for the city, and he doesn't. He can't fix the problems. And because he's a city, he can't declare war as a distraction. He can't say, I'm going to take the New Yorkers' minds off of the economy by attacking New Jersey, because they have weapons of mass destruction. And so he's been on this tear about nanny controls over your soft drinks and all the rest of that, and a judge just tossed it out. And the judge should have tossed it out. Now, we were talking the other day about the criticism that BPA, bisphenol A, has come under. It was a plastic coating used inside drinking bottles, food cans to try and protect the taste from that metallic taint. And it's come under serious criticism lately. And so manufacturers have dumped BPA for a nearly identical chemical called BPS. So now they can say BPA free, but it's got BPS. Apparently a new study coming out, because it's still widely in use, it's still out there, is showing that BPA can negatively impact brain development in children who are eating or drinking out of these BPA-lined containers. Apparently it disrupts a gene necessary for proper nerve cell function. Have you ever noticed this pattern? They'll put the new thing out there and promise you it's safe, and wait until you prove it's not safe, then they'll take it off the market, say, we're sorry, and come out with a new one. I think all this BPA and all these other chemicals, let's just go back to ceramic and glass containers that humans have used for hundreds of thousands of years. Not the glass, ceramic. By the way, speaking of ceramic, I got my wife one of those new ceramic coated pans because we wanted to get away from Teflon and its carcinogenic chemicals, and it works really well. So let's get away from all this high-tech new chemicals, and let's go back to using materials that have been in human usage for thousands and thousands of years without a health hazard. Plain old metal, plain old ceramic, plain old glass. Stop playing around with these gene-corrupting superplastics. That's it for our show. Back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay informed. Please share what you know with who you know. When you have the courage to speak out, you'll give others around you the courage to speak out. Please support Republic Broadcasting. Take a look at what's going on at Republic Trading Group. Please get yourself some silver and gold, and aloha, America.